Right. So what we discussed in the previous sessions about claim processing part, claim processing, claim adjudication, followed by
Right,
the claim settlements, etc. That part was discussed.
right,
And further, there are different codes like 835, 835P, right? So 837, right? So all that, right? 837I, 837IP, right? So D,
right,
270, 271, right? There are different codes. I will explain those codes later. And today what I'm doing is I'm explaining about the data migration approach. Whatever you can see it on the screen, data
right,
migration approach means there are projects, especially being a business analyst, whenever we are working on the healthcare, some projects were migration projects. You might be knowing that.
right.
Migration projects means there was an existing system, old legacy system. Now the old legacy system, we are transforming from old legacy systems to the new application. We are, for example, we are trying to develop a new application now. We were in a stage of transforming from old systems to the new application. That's what something which normally are we doing now.
Okay.
In this regard, it's always important for any business analyst team to understand about what are the steps to be taken and what are the different stages are there in data migration. And this is
Right,
not something I'm specifying for healthcare projects. When there is any kind of data migration happens in the application development, whatever the approach I'm explaining you, this is something common for everyone. Okay, this is not nothing to do with domain. Either we are working for healthcare, we are working for banking, or we are working for insurance, anything. This data migration approach and all everything was common.
right.
There are different stages will be there in data migration. The first stage is called discover, first one.
Uh-huh.
Second is called design.
Mm-hmm.
Third one is called test. Fourth one is called deliver. Okay, these are
Right.
the four stages will be there in data migration. Means when you are working in data migration projects, especially as a BA, we need to gather the requirements. Okay. So what kind of requirements? Requirements depends on the kind of business rules and government mandates. If there is any kind of changes happens and all, that changes has to be captured. So for that reason, there are stages, different stages, which being a business analyst, we must be knowing. Of course, data migration, technically speaking, will be taken care of by the technical people. They will be taken care of the staging database, etc., all that.
Mm-hmm.
But being a business analyst, we will be involving more on the discovering phase. Okay,
Right.
discovering phase at the same time design phase. That's the reason why it's always important for us to know about what are the four steps which is involved in the data migration. The first
Right.
step is called data migration. The first step is called discover. This is the first phase.
Mm-hmm.
The situation as such. For example, there is some old legacy application we are using for healthcare. Now we
Right.
are moving to the new application. For example, we are implementing new application in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we are planning to implement this new application in this scenario, first thing what is that team has to perform is to understand the discovery phase. Discovery phase means wherein we need to understand the landscape analysis first. What is meant by landscape analysis? Landscape analysis means what was the existing application which customer is using and
Mm-hmm.
what kind of hardware and software infrastructure that application consists of. At the same time, what are the features and functionalities which are involved in the existing application? I'm talking about existing, okay, not the
As is.
past. As
Yeah.
is. You can call it as is. Yes. Okay. That is where generally we call it as landscape analysis stands for. The first thing is this. Once the landscape analysis done, the next about stakeholder engagement means you have to make stakeholders to engage in this process. Okay, you have to make them to engage in the process. That's what we call it as stakeholder engagement.
Right.
So stakeholder engagement means you need to identify some people. That's where generally when it comes to the stakeholder engagement, generally there is a process which we call it as power and interest grid. Because if you want to engage stakeholders, first you need to identify. Identification of the stakeholders we do based on two categories. One is power, second is interest. Means people, whoever is having power will be having a decision making authority. People,
Mm-hmm.
whoever has interest will be having involvement. Okay, so those people you have to identify, because you cannot interact with and you don't require to interact with all the stakeholders throughout the project. You need to identify the stakeholders as far as engagement is concerned based on two things: power and interest. Because power, whoever is having power, they will be having decision making authority. Whoever has interest, they will be having involvement, right? So they will be involved more, right? Still,
Right.
stakeholder engagement is what something being a BA you have to do based on power and interest grid. So once we have identified the stakeholders, you need to do the analysis and management.
Right.
Analysis and management means you need to analyze the stakeholder first and you need to manage the stakeholders. Okay, so for that, there is a matrix which normally we use called RACI. RACI matrix. You can write down RACI, RACI, RACI matrix.
RACI.
RASCI, RACI.
RASCI. Okay.
RACI. RACI stands for, R stands for responsible,
Uh-huh.
right? R stands for responsible.
Right.
A stands for accountable.
Okay.
S stands for support.
Okay.
C stands for consulted. I
Consultant.
stands for informed.
Informed.
Uh,
Okay.
so this is what we call it as RACI matrix. Using this RACI matrix, what we do, for example, you want to gather the requirements, or else you need to discuss about the budget, or else we
Mm-hmm.
need to discuss about the timelines. Who is
Mm-hmm.
responsible for that? Who is accountable? Okay, whose support is required? To whom we require to consult? To whom we have to inform? This is what something which we call it as stakeholder analysis and management. This is how we have to engage your stakeholders. Understood? Clear, Nidhi, right? This
Okay.
is the
So
second.
basically, I need to write down the matrix and I have to fill
Backend.
that
This
out.
is all happens in the backend, not on the front
Back.
end. Backend will manage everything. Because, see, for example, if you are a BA, while you are performing your activity as a business analyst, first of all, you need to identify to whom you need to meet for what. Okay. Because
Mm.
meeting the right person for the right decision is an ultimate motto behind this.
Right.
Understood? So, Nidhi, right or not? Right? So,
Right.
what we have to do, because number will be larger. For example, when you talk about stakeholder number will be very large, right? So somewhere around more than 30, 40, more than that also. Because by combining both as external as well as internal stakeholders under one roof. So what
Right.
we have to do now, this is where generally we need to do the stakeholder identification. Means
Mm-hmm.
if you want to limit the number, productive number, if you want to limit, we have to use power and interest grid, so that we have to make a list of people whoever is having power. At the same time, people whoever is having interest will be taken into consideration, so that what happens, the number will be limited. Now, how these people we have to use, that's where generally we call it a stakeholder analysis and management stands for. For example, if there is any changes in requirements happen, okay, so being a business analyst, you must be knowing about to whom you need to interact. So this is all something you have to be planned before, not at the time, because at the time means it leads to confusion. So in order to reduce this complexities, what we have to do, or everything you have to be planned before. That's where
Right.
generally we call it as stakeholder
Analysis.
analysis and management. This is all comes under the stakeholder engagement part.
Yeah.
The third one about scoping. This is where generally scope of the project comes into picture. So if you are a BA, you need to perform scoping of the project. Now, if you want to understand the scope of the project, or if you want to define the scope of the project, these are the steps you have to follow. You can write down these steps.
Right.
Right. So if you want to, because creating a scope of the project is one of the key and important element for a BA to perform. And these are the steps you have to follow to write the scope of the project. You can write down these points.
Okay.
You
I
can
took a
write,
screenshot.
or else you
Yeah.
can take a screenshot.
Yeah. Yeah. I just did. Yeah.
Okay. So these are the things you have to do. Means if you want to define the scope of the project, if you are to define the scope of the project. This is nothing to do with data migration, Nidhi. Either it can be a data migration projects or it can be of any other
It's a
project.
general BA skill, basically.
Be a schedule, scope of the project. These are the steps you have to follow. The first step is to collect all the crucial project information. So if you want to collect crucial project information, first you must be knowing about the project deliverables. Project deliverables means what must be the final conclusion of the project. That's what we call it as project.
Project deliverables.
That is point number one. First, we need to define the project deliverables. What must be the project deliverables has to be decided first. So once we have defined the project deliverables, next you need to identify the available resources. Available resources will be categorized into two different parts. One is about technical resource, second is a manpower resource. Technical resource means which infrastructure is needed. Either it can be hardware or software. All these things are comes under infrastructure. Next, at the same time, manpower resource. Manpower resource means how much manpower do you require to develop the project. Okay, this is what something comes under the availability of resources. Next, what are to be included and what are to be excluded. Followed by this, what would be the project constraints? Project constraints means if there is any difficulties, it can be, for example, you may be having some budget limitation, or else you may be having some timelines limitation. This is all something comes under the project constraint part. So to write scope of the project, either it can be regular projects or data migration. This is the first step you have to follow. Second, you need to build a project schedule. Build a project schedule means you need to list out what are the major tasks to be finished for this particular project. And to finish those tasks, what would be the milestones? Because for next 2 months, what we have to execute. For the next 3 months, what is that you need to execute? That's what we call it as milestones transfer. Next, you need to know about the phases of the project, right? So the phases of the project means analysis, planning and
SDLC,
implementation, testing, right? So these phases you must be knowing.
Right. I
So
know.
once you're done with these two steps, you will be tailoring scope of the project according to the organization requirement, what you have. Do you understand this, Nidhi?
Right. Tailoring the scope means filling out the gap, like
Customize.
customizing.
It's not filling the gaps. Tailoring the scope means customization according to the organization.
Business requirements. Okay.
Okay, that's what we do. After that, we need to compile and review. Compile and review means we need to cross check everything. What was the first point? Read out the first point. Please read.
Collect all crucial project information.
First, under compile and review. Read the first point.
Compile. Okay. Is it clear why this project is necessary and important?
Right. First of all, you must be knowing about clarity. Like, is it clear why this project is necessary and important? First, you must be knowing. Okay. Second, yeah, go ahead.
Do I know exactly who the project stakeholders are? Listing
Yeah,
down
that's
all
what
the
we have
SMEs.
discussed some time back.
Right. Listing down all the SMEs and data stewards, all the people who are involved, right?
Right. Next.
And will my stakeholders see a value and benefit in the project?
Your people should see value in this project. Okay, that is important.
Like business use cases, why are we implementing, right? What is the end output? What
because your stakeholders should see value in this. Okay. Because if your stakeholders have not seen any value, then there will be no value to develop this. Okay.
Right.
Next.
Are resources adequate to complete this project? Do we
Yes,
have
resources can be anything. It can be manpower, it can be technology.
Right.
Next.
Are timelines realistic for the deliverables?
Right. So timelines must be realistic. Next.
Realistic, yeah. Does my team have access to the necessary resources? Could be technical standpoint.
Team should be having all the necessary resources, accessibility is required. Next.
Is the list of inclusions and exclusions specific enough?
Right.
Means is it out of scope and all things, inclusion and exclusion?
Yes, sometimes it can be
out of scope
also,
scope.
right? That we have to address. We have to identify.
Right. In scope, out of scope. What is okay? Is there too much room for tasks to be added after the project has kicked off?
Right. So once the project is kicked off, is there any possibility for us to add anything of that provision is there or not? That's it.
Hmm.
Next.
Is there any project task or constraint I haven't considered yet?
Right.
Okay.
So is there
I mean,
anything that I haven't
we need to.
considered it so far is also something which we have to be addressed.
Okay. Yeah, this is very clear. Thank you. Yeah.
Right? So these are the points to be considered when you want to define the scope of the project. Based on that, you put the scope into your work and you start working. Okay. You are
Got it.
whatever the kind of project you are going to work on, this is something essentially important which you have to do. This is what something which we call it as scoping.
Right.
Next, planning and governance. You know that, right? So project planning, governance structure, etc. Next, commissioning. Commissioning means how this can be done because there is some X amount of commissioning which is involved in it. So what will be the commissioning percentage is what something which we have to know. This is
Mhm.
the first phase in the data migration. Means discovery is the first phase.
Right.
Second phase is called design phase. Means here in the first of all discovery phase, you will be identifying the importance of data migration. Why is it important? How is it important? To know that
Mhm.
discovery phase is being used. Second is phase called design phase. In this design phase, what we do, first of all, we need to identify the approach. Means how to design the project. That approach you have to identify. What must be the approach? So once you have identified the approach, you need to perform data mapping. You need to perform
Data
data
mapping.
mapping. Now, if you want to perform, if you means not as a BA alone, Nidhi, I'm talking about even from the technical people point of view. Data mapping is one of the key and prominent element we have to be focused more on. Now, if you want to do data mapping, these are the steps you have to follow. You can write down or you can take a screenshot.
Okay. Sure. Let me take a
If you want
screenshot.
to define data mapping, these are the steps you have to follow. Means if anybody wants to perform data mapping, these are the things to be taken care of. First, we need to define the data. Means normally our example, if you take ours is a healthcare data. Am I right?
Right.
So we have to take the data, whatever the tables, fields we have, right? So frequency of data transfer, that has to be defined and that has to be identified and defined first.
Mm-hmm.
Second, we need to map the data because when it comes to the mapping of data, what is required? You match the sources fields to the destination fields because there is a source field, there is a destination field.
Source and
Source,
target. Yeah.
source field means existing one. Destination fields means where you want to reach that. That you have to select. Okay, understood. For example.
Yeah.
Nidhi,
Understood.
right? So this is the second point. This is what we call it as mapping the data. Second point, map the data. So once we map the data, the third point is about the transformation part. What transformation means? There are some rules and regulations which has to be written in a form of code. This is where generally this coding people come into picture, medical coding people or someone, whoever are there, those people have to write the coding. There are different tools we use like SPSS, SAS, clinical report related healthcare coding will be there. So
Mhm.
those are the things which are used. There are different formulas or coding, whatever the coding is required according to the rules and all, if requires. Okay, that's the reason why I have mentioned it as if required.
If
If
required.
required, when there is any transformation taken place, the transformation formula or is the kind of rules, whatever is needed for you to do the coding, that we have to be performed in the third step.
Third step. Yeah.
So once we have transformed, what we have to do, you have to do the testing part. Test means whatever the transformation of data done, that you have to make sure whether this is properly working or not. How is it
Right.
working? This is UAT part, right? So everything will be done in this regard. So once the testing is done, the next you have to deploy. Why deployment? Because, for example, sometimes application is performing well in your system, but you cannot guarantee application is performing well in the client systems also. Right?
Hmm.
You have to show it. So this is
Right.
where generally deployment comes into picture. Means you need to deploy the application when the transformation of data is done. So you need to deploy the application and you have to make sure it is working fine or not. Because migration successfully done or not, if you want to know, this deployment has to be done. So once the deployment is completed, the next is about maintenance and update. This is a continuous process. This is nothing to do with one day. This is a
Mm-hmm.
continuous process. As long as you are working on the project, you have to be continued further. This is
Right.
what something which we call it as data mapping. Understood?
Right.
Clear?
Yeah. So I just have one question
Yeah.
for the transformation, right? Can you give me like, I know few examples from like insurance standpoint and all, because I've written source to target mapping documents and I wrote some transformation rules. But from healthcare standpoint, what will that look like?
Transformation means customer patient data.
Uh-huh. So
Patient
how
data
in
is
the
the
portal
transformation.
it should look like how in the what
For
logical
example, there are some XML formats I will show you.
uh-huh.
For example, normally files will be in XML format. You can see it. You can see over here. For example, this is the report. Okay.
Uh-huh.
This is
Uh-huh.
the report of XML format file, for example. In this
Okay.
report, this is a radiology report. Of course, I have taken some important information that I have deleted in this.
Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
here you need to mention the name of the patient, right? So at the same time, what was his MRN number, date of birth, at the same time,
Mm.
information of the patient, at the
Right,
same
right.
time, whatever the data, right? So is there any kind of history for that particular patient is having or not? Because you are doing the chest X-ray, okay, radiology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is how generally the customer data form looks like. You can see. Okay, this is all something will be in the electronic format. Electronic
Right.
format means encrypted format. This is all will be there. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to write down all this, and followed by this, you need to mention the impressions also. Impressions and recommendations has to be mentioned here.
Hmm.
Okay, this is where generally this kind of data is what something which we have to be transformed. As an example, I'm giving. Okay, not everything.
Got it. Got it.
So this is what something which we have to do. This is how generally this XML files and all everything, file formats and all everything will be there. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, how the XML file format looks like, I'll tell you in the next session. Okay. So
Got it.
this is what something we do under the mapping part. Do you
Mm-hmm.
understand this? Clear?
Right, right.
So once mapping, the next is gap analysis. You know about gap analysis. Gap analysis nothing but as is and to be. Whatever the as is process do we have that you are transforming to be. That's where
Right.
we call it as is and to be. This is what
Do
we
you,
call it
do,
as gap
do
analysis.
you have like screenshots that I can capture for gap analysis? Anything of that
Sorry.
sort? Do you have like more? I know, like how you showed me scope and how you showed me
Hmm.
data mapping. Do you have something for gap analysis also?
I will see, but I am not sure because
Okay.
I will check. I think if there is anything is there, I will show you. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you can take you can take this. These two I have prepared.
Okay.
Hmm.
Current
You
state
can
and
take this screenshot. I'll open two.
okay.
Means if you want to do gap analysis, I have prepared one this thing. I think this might be useful to
Okay. Yeah, this one is yeah.
you. Hmm.
Um,
This is about gap analysis.
got it. Yeah.
Understood? Clear?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So this is what generally. So gap analysis means transforming from as is and to be is called gap analysis. That's what
Mm-hmm.
something which we have to do under the gap analysis.
Got
So
it.
once gap analysis done, what we have to do, you have to do the development. Development team will start working on the development of the requirement.
Right.
Understood? Nidhi, clear?
Got it.
So once the design phase is done, the next is testing. You know about the testing part, right? So testing means
Right.
coding will be tested first.
Mm-hmm.
Once the coding test completed, the next we go for process testing. And at the same time, different testing processes like user acceptance testing, right? So performance tuning. All these things will be done under the testing part. This is what something which we call as testing. So
Got it.
once it is tested, the next is called delivery phase. Delivery phase means once it is tested, you have to deliver this to the customer, wherein we need to provide some post-launch support and all. So that if there is any kind of integration with any of other technology, if any, okay, we have
Mm-hmm.
to integrate with other technologies. So finally, this project will be gone live. This is where generally this migration process is what something which being a BA, one must be knowing.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Is it clear?
Yep.
Right. So